do this in. We'll go ahead and do this opening prayer, the taking refuge and generating bodhicitta in the Tibetan. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, daki chenyen yipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, daki chenyen yipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dagni kyapsu chi, daki chenyen yipe sonam ki, drola penchir sangye druparsho. And then the four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And now we'll go to the 7-limb prayer. And if any of you have practiced it, some of those preparatory practices that are in preparing the mind for meditation, and gone through the 7-limb practice in the confession part of the practice, then you can visualize with each line. You can visualize the particular process that we can go through. Okay. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind, and present clouds of every type of offering, actual and mentally transformed. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time, and rejoice in the merits of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until samsara ends and turn the wheel of dharma for sentient beings. I dedicate the merit created by myself and others to the great enlightenment of all sentient beings. And then the mandala offering, where we visualize a purified universe, purified consciousness, purified form, and offer it to the Guru Buddha, who we visualize in the space in front of us. Saji perki chukshin meto, tramri rablingji, nide gyempadi, sangye jindu migde uwagi, drokunam dachingla, terpasho, idam guru rata mandalakam yiryatayo. Okay, well, welcome all you wonderful human precious beings. Here we are, and today, I'm going to get right into today's topic, because I don't really want to take, I just want to take this one session on it, but it's an important topic. And what I was telling Kevin earlier is that on this one, I have just relied just almost completely on the teachings of Venerable Thupten Chodron. So what you're hearing, it's all, it's her credit, it goes to her credit, to her teachers and all of that. Well, the way it's explained, say in Lama Tsongkhapa's Lamrim Chenmo, and in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, the Pabanka Rinpoche and Lama Tsongkhapa just go through basically the lower realms and what you experience there, and you're sort of left going, But what Venerable Thupten Chodron does is she adds this incredible psychological aspect to it that really, then the whole thing starts to make sense. So I just wanted to explain, that's what you're going to be hearing today. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get right into it. I'll open with a quote from Lama Tsongkhapa is the foundation of all good qualities, which pertains to this particular topic and the last topic that we had about death. So it's the third line. After death, just like a shadow follows the body, the results of black and white karma follow. And that's from the foundation of all good qualities. So in this, the key practices of the Path series that we're doing, we're studying and meditating on the gradual stages of the path to enlightenment, or the initial, intermediate, and great scopes of the Lamrim topics that were introduced to Tibet by the Indian Buddhist master Atisha, and further developed by the great Tibetan monk and philosopher Tsongkhapa. These teachings are essentially a gradual course in training the mind in the stages of the path to enlightenment. If we want to achieve Buddhahood, which is the utter uprooting of all our afflictive emotions and the development to perfection of all the positive qualities, we first have to develop realizations into the earlier sections of the Lamrim. If we don't, we won't develop realizations into the later parts. It's similar to how we can't jump directly from first grade at school to beginning our postgraduate studies without first successfully completing grade school, middle school, high school, and university levels. As I said before, this teaching on the lower realms comes directly from Venerable Thubten Shudran. Her keen insight into the Buddhist teachings and her ability to present those teachings to Western students in a way that is psychologically and spiritually meaningful are among the most helpful I've encountered, particularly regarding this topic of the lower realms, which can be so difficult for us Westerners. So all credit goes to her and her lineage of wonderful teachers. So we're in the middle of the meditation topics of the initial scope of the Lamrim. The goal of a person who is practicing the initial scope is to cultivate the causes for attaining a fortunate rebirth in cyclic existence, either as a human or as a being in a higher realm. The previous discussions, we've talked about what makes a human life precious, what its opportunities are, what the good qualities that a human precious life has, and how difficult it is to attain. We talked about the purpose of our human life, how we can really make use of this opportunity we have to tap into the potential we have to become a Buddha, to uncover it, and to really make use of it, make our lives meaningful for others. But as we discussed last week, this life is relatively short. It goes by quickly. Death is the inevitable result of having taken birth. So death is something all of us have to face someday. There's no way around it. If we can prepare for it properly, death doesn't have to be frightening, and it can actually be blissful. I've told some of you about the passing of our dear Dharma friend, Carolyn Swan, and many of you remember her. Carolyn was a Buddhist practitioner from the time of her early adult years in the 1960s until her death in 2016. She lived in India for some of that time. Her guru was His Holiness Sakya Trizin, who was the head of the Sakya school of Tibetan Buddhism. Carolyn meditated and practiced 3 hours every morning without fail, even when she was traveling. A couple of days before she passed, Kavita and I were in her bedroom saying prayers. As we were reciting the Heart Sutra, which she asked us to do, Carolyn exclaimed, "I can see the smoke-like appearance," and which is one of the early internal signs which appear to the mind as death is approaching. And she was very happy, almost even excited. After Carolyn passed away, she remained in her bed for several days. When we visited her the day after she died, I think, she looked exquisite. Her husband, Mark, and her daughter, Ava, had placed beautiful flowers all around her on the bed and on her body, you know? And so far from looking dead, she looked almost radiant. Carolyn had a great sense of humor. And when I sat down next to her by the bed, I could sense her humor. And there was a very light and positive feeling in the room. Well, several years later, His Holiness Sakya Trizin spoke about Carolyn in a wisdom podcast recorded at Tsechen Kunchab Ling, which is the US seat of His Holiness Sakya-Trizin in Walden, New York. And Carolyn had visited there a number of times when we knew her for retreats. So this is what he said, quote, "One of our students is an American lady. Her name's Carolyn. She was not a very serious practitioner as such, but she received many teachings from many gurus for the last so many years. She passed a few years ago, and when she passed, she was in Tukdam, which is meditation on the clear light mind." This is Sakya-Trizin speaking. "When you die, when you are in Tukdam, you don't change your colors, there is no smell, the body doesn't decay. Carolyn was not a secret practitioner. She did some retreats, not so many retreats, but she received so many teachings, so many initiations, and so many teachings from many great gurus." He continues, quote, "At the time of death, due to the dissolving of the elements, everybody experiences the fundamental clear light mind. Those who lack practice, they cannot recognize it. They just become unconscious. But those who have certain experience, meditational experience, they can recognize the basic clear light of death, which is called mother clear light, as well as the experience of clear light that they've gained through their meditation practice, which is called sun clear light. Therefore, mother and son, they can recognize each other and then they can remain. This is what is called Tukdam. As long as someone can remain in this meditation, the body doesn't decay. Those in Tukdam can remain for 100 hours or even 200 hours without the body decaying. I had heard about other Westerners doing this, but with Carolyn, this was our own experience." And that's the end of Sakya-Trizin's quote.
You know, I gotta just say, he didn't know maybe that she meditated for 3 hours every day.
Maybe he didn't. Maybe he didn't.
Anyway, you know,
I mean, and I remember at every class, Carolyn took copious notes, you know?
Yeah, I'm going to go over
Yeah.
this because she, yeah, Mark, her husband, has given us, we're building, we have the aspiration to create an archive of Geshe Drachma's teachings over the 12 years.
Speak loud enough so that it, yeah. Yeah. All right. So a similar thing happened.
Geshe Drachma, you can mention.
That's what I'm saying. A similar thing happened with our guru, Geshe Drachma, when he passed away a year later in 2017. Geshe-la was an accomplished meditator. Before we met him, he had just completed 9 years in meditative retreat in the mountains above Dharamsala. Those who were with him in India when he died said he remained in a non-decaying state of clear light meditation, or Tukdam, for a full week until a red drop came out of his nostril, indicating his consciousness had left the body. What happened to Geshe Drachma and Carolyn didn't happen by accident. Nothing actually happens accidentally in life, even so-called accidents. Things don't just happen out of nowhere, they happen due to causes. We have to look at our own life and see if we've created the causes to die in a similar way. This is just a very scientific thing. Things happen due to causes. So we have to examine the causes we've created as an indication of what kinds of things are likely to happen to us in the future. At death time, our consciousness starts to separate from this body. Life starts when the consciousness and this body are joined together. Dying is when they start to separate, and death is when that separation is complete, and the consciousness goes on to take some other body, influenced, of course, by previous actions. This would indicate that we are not our body. This is a big thing, especially for us Westerners, because we're so attached to the body. So much of our ego identity is wrapped up in our body. We aren't our body, though the consciousness changes a lot depending on the body. Similarly, after death, when our consciousness takes another body, we'll be influenced by the physical structure of that body as well. The body we take in our future life will depend on the causes that we've created in our previous lives and in this lifetime. So now we're going to talk about the kind of ripening of karma that happens at death time. The type of karma that ripens at the time of our death, which throws us into another body, they call it throwing karma, also depends on causes. At death time, the sum total of positive and negative actions aren't just put on a scale that somebody looks at and decides whether we're going to go up or whether we're going to go down. According to Buddhism, there's nobody judging. There's nobody determining. Nobody's running the show and punishing people. Things just naturally happen due to causes and conditions. Our karma isn't calculated and added up. In one lifetime, we create many, many different kinds of what they call karmic seeds, karmic imprints on our mind stream. For instance, today, all of us have already had many different thoughts, done many different actions, and had many resulting imprints on our mind streams. Throughout the day, we're constantly engaged, either mentally, physically, or verbally, constantly leaving these energy traces or imprints on our mind stream. Out of all these imprints, which ones are going to manifest and ripen at the time of our death? Not all of them can. Certain ones will, and these are the ones that will propel our consciousness into a certain kind of body in a future lifetime. There are three ways that our karma can ripen at the time of our death. The first kind of karmic imprints that are likely to ripen at death are from very powerful actions. If we've done something that's an extremely powerful negative action, even one time, like killing our father or killing our mother, or killing an arhat, like a highly realized bodhisattva, these are the kind of actions that manifest first because they're so potent, they weigh so heavily on our mind stream. Similarly, if we've done some very powerful positive actions, something really altruistic, or in relation to the Buddha Dharma Sangha, these positive karmic actions can manifest or ripen at the time of death. The second way that karma can ripen at the time of death is karma that ripens from our habitual actions. So if there are no outstanding powerful actions in our mind stream at death time, then the ones that are likely to ripen are the ones that are more habitual. Just through the force of doing something habitually, a powerful propensity builds up in the mind. We see it with any habit we have now in this life. Very small habits, just by doing them over and over again, become very strong and difficult to break. For example, habitually getting angry, or habitually lying, or habitually being generous and habitually being kind. Then the third type of ripening comes from, at the time of death, comes from the condition or the state of mind that we're in at that time. So the type of thoughts that we have while we're dying create the condition, or like the fertile ground, for a lot of the karma that ripens. This is a really important point. We can see that even now when we're awake, if our mind is calm and peaceful, things go better in our environment and with our experience than when our mind is disturbed and upset. Similarly, at death time, if our mind is, say, filled with clinging and attachment, not wanting to leave this life, clinging to relationships, clinging to our body, or if the mind is filled with anger, anger at dying, anger at things that happened years ago and we haven't let go of, if the mind is disturbed in that kind of way at the time of death, that acts like the fertilizer that makes it possible for those negative karmic seeds to grow. That's why when somebody's dying, or when we're dying, we should try to keep the room really peaceful and calm, like Carolyn did. Try not to generate any attachment or aversion or anxiety in a person. If we're there, try not to generate that kind of attachment or aversion or anxiety in their mind when they're dying. So our Dharma practice is especially important at death time. Because if the mind is able to be in a very positive state, we can remember our teacher, or we can take refuge in Buddha Dharma Sangha, or we can generate loving kindness at the time that we're dying. If we can think of emptiness, like Carolyn and Geshe Drachma did, then the mind is in a very positive state. And that also acts as the fertilizer, which encourages the ripening of previously created positive actions. So now we're going to talk about facing the possibility of a rebirth in a lower realm. And this is the next point in this sequence of Lam Rim topics, is called meditation on the lower realms. We talked about the preciousness of human life, the inevitability of death, and how to make our life meaningful. Then what we have to do is consider what kind of rebirth we can have after we die, either an upper one or a lower one. Of course, all of us would like to think if we are reborn, then we'll have another human life, or maybe even something better. But it's also good and it's wise to be realistic and ask, what happens if things don't go so well? If we really look at the karma we've created in this lifetime, and if we're very honest with ourselves, what we should be asking is this question: has the amount of my positive karma exceeded the amount of my negative karma? Which do I have more of? Which is more likely to ripen? If we really look at and think about the different destructive actions we've engaged in, and which ones we've actually succeeded in abandoning, we might come to realize that because cause and effect is an observable fact, there is a chance that we could take an unpleasant rebirth simply because we've created the causes for it. We all like to think about things that are beautiful and wonderful. We tend to block out things we, consider disagreeable, that make us uneasy. If something's nice, then we like to think about it. We like to believe in it. But if it makes us feel uneasy inside, then we don't really want to think about it and we don't want to believe it. In other words, very often what we use as criteria for what we believe or what we don't believe is whether we like it or not. And that's not a real wise criteria to use to evaluate what exists and what doesn't exist. If something actually exists, it doesn't make any difference whether we believe it or not. That just shows our personal preferences, our mental blocks, and our biases. So we have to have be a little bit more open-minded, and we have to be a little more courageous to examine the possibility of lower realms. When we listen to Buddhist descriptions of lower realms and rebirth, we have to try and put aside, or at least temporarily, the Judeo-Christian mindset that has pervaded the Western world for centuries. One of the biggest blocks we have as Westerners is that we tend to look at Buddhism and project Judeo-Christian meaning and values onto it. And then we get really confused. So it's important to remember when we are talking about this, that according to Buddhism, lower rebirth is not a punishment. Nobody sends us there, and it's not taught in order to make us afraid or intimidated or to somehow control us. So the question arises, why did the Buddha teach about unfortunate states of rebirth? People often think maybe he did it just to try and scare us into being good. And we can clearly see how this reflects our pervasive Western culture, kind of a scare tactic to make us behave. But the Buddha didn't need to teach us things to make us fearful and terrified. There are already enough fearful and terrifying things in the world as is. That's not why the Buddha taught about lower realms and rebirth. In the context of our path to liberation and enlightenment, there's absolutely no purpose in becoming terrified. The Buddha taught about the lower realms out of compassion for us, because he was able to see that within our mind streams, there may exist the causes to take a lower rebirth. If we can learn about them beforehand, then we can purify those causes and we can stop creating more causes for it. For instance, if there was a bomb in your car and you didn't know it, and somebody came and told you about it, and you said, oh, you're just telling me that to make me afraid, well, that would be kind of reckless and foolish, wouldn't it? Instead, if we realize the person is warning us about something serious because they care about us and our welfare, then perhaps we'll look under the hood and take action to do something about it. Also, in order for us to develop genuine love and compassion for all beings, which is something we really want to do in our hearts as Buddhists, how can we do it unless we're able to reflect on others' sufferings and miseries? For example, the misery someone experiences when they're born in an unfortunate realm. How can we be in touch with the misery of being born there if we don't even want to think about the existence of those realms or even acknowledge our own possibility of being born there? In order to establish a connection to others' experience of pain so that we can generate genuine compassion for them, we have to also be willing to tap into our own problems and our own sufferings. Otherwise, our love and compassion is unstable. It's just fair weather compassion. We'll lack the skill and courage and wisdom that it takes to have genuine love and compassion the moment any situation, gets out of hand, becomes difficult and really challenging for us. If we have an untrained mind that's easily overwhelmed, how can we possibly benefit others? So next we get into what are the types of lower realms. People often have a lot of doubt about the existence of lower realms and rebirths. Generally, Buddhism talks about 3 unfortunate kinds of rebirth. The first is the animal realm. We can see animal with our eyes and we can't deny their existence. Of course, we can think, how could I as a human ever be born as an animal? Again, we have to connect with the fact that the thing we think of as me is not our human body. We refer to our body as my body, as if whoever it is we think we are is the owner or possessor of it. In addition, just think of all the different shapes our bodies have been from the time of conception until right now. We can begin to see that we really aren't our body. We can see that animals have a consciousness and a mind. They experience pain and pleasure, that's obvious. And so we can see they're living beings just like we're living beings. It's just that their consciousness is born into that kind of body. Likewise, our consciousness can take that kind of rebirth. It's a little bit easier to understand the possibility of this because at least we can see animals. The next 2 unfortunate realms, often we don't see. The second one is called the hungry ghost realm, or the preta realm. Preta is a Sanskrit word for hungry ghost. This realm consists of beings who experience extreme hunger, thirst, and craving. And it also includes spirits. When psychic people are channeling, they sometimes channel spirits from this realm. The third lower realm is one of extreme pain and suffering. Sometimes it's called the hellish realm or the hell realm, and is characterized by extreme heat and cold. There's a lot of physical anguish in this realm. When we hear the descriptions of these 3 realms, we sometimes will say, well, okay, animals exist, but I don't know about hungry ghosts or hell realms. So in order to understand existence, we have to understand the way Buddha talks about the types of phenomena that exist. And Buddhism says there are 3 different types of phenomena. The first is manifest phenomena. This refers to phenomena that we contact directly with our senses. A computer is manifest phenomena. The chair you're sitting in, things like that. Animals are manifest phenomena because we can see them, touch them, hear them, smell them, taste them, and cognize them. Then the next one is hidden. It's called hidden phenomena. Hidden phenomena refers to those things that we understand through inference. For example, emptiness or the lack of inherent existence comes under this category because we understand emptiness initially through logic or inference, and only later are we able to realize it with direct perception, with direct cognition. Another more simple example would be if we saw smoke coming from a hill in the distance, we infer that there must be fire there if there's smoke, even though the fire is hidden from our view. That's hidden phenomena. And then the third kind of existing phenomena is extremely hidden phenomena. These are things that we come to understand through accepting someone else's word on it, because that someone else, like the Buddha, is very knowledgeable and has no reason at all to deceive us. So there are different kinds of things we know in different kinds of ways. A table, for instance, we know from direct perception. The lack of inherent existence, we have to use logic first and eventually go to direct perception. And then other things like the realms of the hungry ghosts or the hell beings, those might be manifest phenomena for the beings living within them. But for us, they are extremely hidden. And we have to rely on the word of somebody else to understand them, and then keep checking it out to see if it makes sense for us. If the Buddha's words seem true to us, then that gives a little space in our mind to begin to consider the existence of lower realms that we can't see. We might take the idea of these lower realms on as a hypothesis or provisionally accept them because the Buddha described them. The Buddha tends to know what he's talking about, and there is really no reason why he would try to deceive us. Some of us might think, well, maybe it's possible for these realms to exist, and maybe it was not the Buddha's intention to terrify us by explaining them to us, but couldn't we get the same motivation to purify and develop our good qualities if the Buddha just explained the positive aspects of rebirth to us? If we got positive reinforcement rather than negative reinforcement, wouldn't that work better? In many cases, positive reinforcement does work better. When we hear about the qualities of the Buddha and that we have the same untapped Buddha nature within us, we can be inspired to cultivate our potential so we can be like that. That's nice to think about. We'll start thinking, I can do that. I want to do that. But we should also think about some other situations in which we hear about the positive effects of something, but it still doesn't work to motivate us very much. For instance, take somebody who is very overweight. They go to the doctor, and if the doctor says, you'll feel so much better if you lose weight, they'll say, yes, yes, I agree. And then on the way home, they stop at 7-Eleven or Circle K and they buy some Twinkies, ding dongs, and a couple of pints of Haagen-Dazs. Even though they know better, somehow the positive motivation doesn't move them to actually lose the weight. But if the doctor says, look, you're going to get a heart attack and go into cardiac arrest if you don't lose some weight, then the person becomes a bit apprehensive and they go directly home, skip Circle K and 7-Eleven, and go on a diet.
They might have to have a heart attack first.
If they don't have a heart attack first, right?
Brian, I know you have had a cardiac episode. Did your diet improve after more than before?
The best way to prevent a heart attack is to survive the first one. Yes. So to answer your question, absolutely. Yeah, it's a major wake-up call.
Yeah, right. So sometimes hearing about negative consequences can motivate us in ways that just hearing about the positive consequences can't, just like you said, Brian. I mean, having the first heart attack is a real motivator to not have another one. Venerable Thupten Chödrön says, sometimes we get very, very lazy in our practice and we rationalize and procrastinate. This is true. Sometimes if we think about the possibility of a lower rebirth, it can wake us up like throwing water on our face and make it extremely easy for us to practice. Our mind becomes very motivated. So this question comes up, are the lower realms a creation of the mind? These different realms of existence are dependent arisings. The Buddha didn't create the lower realms. Buddhism would say God didn't create the lower realms. They come into existence because the causes for them exist. And the cause is negative action. Our own personal negative action is what creates our rebirth in a lower realm. The lower realms, in some ways, are definitely created by the mind. Our actions based on what our mind is thinking are what propel us to take that kind of rebirth. There's an interesting quote from Shantideva, the great Indian sage, who said, by whom were they zealously forged, these weapons of hell? Who made the burning iron ground And whence did the conflagration come? And then he answers, the sage, meaning the Buddha, has taught that everything like that is from the evil mind. There's nothing to be feared in the three realms apart from the mind. In other words, it's our own mind that creates our existence in the lower realms. How does that happen? How does this arise? How can we get some kind of feeling that it's possible to take that kind of rebirth? Something that Venerable Tipton Children talks about and that can help us get a feel for this is if we remember a time when we were really paranoid and very fearful, terrified, so freaked out and frightened. Sort of, if you can bring yourself there, remember that a time that was like that. I can easily conjure that one up for myself. And due to our fear, there was also a lot of underlying anger, because fear and anger sort of go hand in hand. If you can remember a time in your life when you were like that, then imagine getting stuck in that mental state. So stuck in that fearful, paranoid, angry mental state that everything you saw through that kind of a filter. And if that mental state became so intense that it began to appear externally to you as your environment and your body, that would be what a hell realm is like. We can see this even in the case of people who are still in a human body. If somebody has a very disturbed mind, even though nobody else is trying to harm them, they see harm. Even though there's no danger, they're terrified. Even if somebody takes them out of their environment and puts them into another one, they still see things exactly the same way because their mind is so stuck. Another one is, remember a time in your life when you had so much craving and clinging and wanted something so badly, but you didn't have it. How your mind became completely obsessed. You couldn't function because your mind was totally stuck. I'm sure all of us can come up with something like that that we can remember. For instance, this can occur sometimes when a relationship breaks up. Our mind gets completely stuck on the other person and we can't think about anything else. There's so much clinging, so much attachment, so much frustration. Again, imagine that mental state becoming so intense and huge that it appears to you as your environment and your body, so that your whole life experience is one of clinging and continuous frustration. Everything you want evades you, and your mind is obsessed all the time. That's the realm of the hungry ghosts. Or have you ever experienced a time when your mind was really foggy, like when you had a really bad hangover, or like when you're just coming out of anesthesia? Has that ever happened to you? You know you can think better, but you just can't do it. There's a state of mind where you can't put 2 and 2 together, no matter how hard you try. You're just sort of totally fogged up so that you can't comprehend clearly. You cannot make any logical decisions, and you can only seem to act on instinct, right? Again, if you take that confused, very obscure state of mind and turn it into the environment, turn it into your body, turn it into your life experience, then for the most part, that's basically what the animal realm is like, a kind of fogged up, instinct-based thinking. What would it be like to be a chicken or a deer or a fish or a worm or a bug? What do they think about all day? They have mind streams with Buddha potential. All sentient beings do, yet their mind streams are so obscured. What can they do? Each morning when I feed the deer on our property and I make eye contact with them, I get a sense of these living, conscious beings who want to be happy, they don't want to suffer, and whose physical brains are incapable of letting their consciousness do much more than go through the instinctive processes of searching for food, being alert to danger, and maintaining the life cycle of the herd. The same goes for our chickens. They have these incredible behavioral instincts, but that's about it. Still, I can clearly see that they want to be happy and they don't want to suffer. If we think in these ways about our mental states and how they're connected to the way we perceive our environment and our body, we may begin to get a feeling of how it's possible for our mind stream to take different kinds of rebirths. It isn't really such an impossible thing to contemplate. His Holiness the Dalai Lama once said, "I really wish there weren't lower realms. I really wish these things didn't exist and I didn't have to teach about them." But that's not really the point. The point is not what we wish existed or wish it didn't exist. So why should we think about the lower realms? Well, the first reason we should think about them is that it can increase our mindfulness and it help us to stop our destructive behavior patterns. The reason it's helpful to learn about the lower realms and then to think about them is that by doing so, we can take this knowledge and use it in a wise way to make our lives meaningful right now. By understanding these kinds of suffering and these other types of rebirths, it gives us a powerful incentive to purify our actions and to stop following our continual destructive behavior patterns. It's especially effective when we notice that we're starting to get into some of our old behavior patterns, to remember that these destructive actions are leaving imprints on our mind stream that could possibly ripen into some kind of lower rebirth. Do we want to experience the results of our negative actions? If we don't want results that are similar to the cause, maybe we should think twice about telling someone off and losing our temper. If we don't want results similar to the cause, maybe we should think twice about cheating somebody in business or manipulatively lying to someone to get our way. So it can be really helpful to think about the lower realms. It helps us break the kinds of destructive impulses, the destructive patterns that we have, and the kind of destructive behavior that we have. And then we can purify this. We can, engage in some kind of purification practice for any kind of destructive behavior that we've done in the past. The second reason to think about these lower realms is that it can protect us from suffering in future lives. Just as we try to protect ourselves even from the slightest suffering now in this life, we should try to protect ourselves from the possibility of future sufferings in future lives. Think about how we feel just now in this life when we're too hungry, or we're so tired, or we're really, really hot, or we're too cold. How difficult is it to do much of anything, let alone something virtuous like studying and practicing the Dharma when we're in that kind of situation, that kind of environment? What if in some future life, due to our negative karma, we get really, really stuck in those kinds of environments? How can we practice? How can we lift ourselves up and get ourselves out of there? So if we have the possibility now to eliminate the causes for that, then it's well worth our while to be cautious. If we start thinking, oh, all this lower realm stuff is just to make me afraid, so I don't believe it, our minds could become obscured by our own pride and arrogance. But if we take these teachings from the Buddha to heart, they can really invigorate our practice. If we try to prevent in this life even a small suffering that we might experience tomorrow, why wouldn't we try to prevent a larger suffering that we could possibly experience in a future rebirth? It makes sense to do that. And then the third benefit of thinking about these lower realms is that it can transform our minds. If we do have some faith that it's in our nature to have the potential to become a Buddha, then if we practice well, our mental state can get better and better. That is, if we develop our loving kindness, develop our patience, generosity, wisdom, our mind can get better and better. It can get happier and happier. What happens if we don't do that and instead we develop our anger, our jealousy, our pride, and our attachment? Well, in a very similar way, we'll get better and better at being angry, jealous, proud, and attached. The difference is our mental state won't get closer to Buddhahood. Our mental state will just degenerate. It would be really illogical to think, oh yes, my mind can become a Buddha. but it can't become an animal or it can't become a hungry ghost. We can clearly see that the kind of person we become is completely dependent on our mental states, our mental habits, what kind of things we cultivate. We can cultivate our good qualities, or we can just let our bad qualities run the show. It is completely up to us. Our whole experience that follows is a result of our own mental states. Our mental states do affect the kind of body we have, even this body. It's well known that our mental state can contribute to problems like ulcers and high blood pressure. There's a connection between the body and the mind. If we just let our mind go in any direction, our body in this life will also go in the corresponding direction. And so will our body in the next life. If we take the time to develop loving kindness and patience, our body will be affected by that in this life. There are all sorts of statistics in the medical profession about how people are healed from diseases much more rapidly if they have a good mental state. We all know about this. Our mental state does affect our body in this life. It does affect the body in future lives. There is a relationship between the body and the mind. So these lower realms, what are they? Are they a mental state, a physical state, or an illusion? People often wonder whether the different realms are just mental states rather than physically existing places. Well, for us humans in the human realm, the animal realm definitely seems to be a physical realm because we can experience it with our physical senses. The realm of hungry ghosts and spirits is interesting because either it exists or it doesn't, depending on what kind of culture you live in. People from indigenous cultures that live close to the land see ghosts and spirits regularly and often communicate with them. Nawan Tome, who was Lama Pasang's classmate at Drepung Monastery, used to tell us stories about ghosts and spirits that lived in and around his mountain village in a region of northwest India that used to be part of Tibet. One time at the dinner table, he told us this story about 3 mischievous female ghosts and an old man from his village and what they did one night. And then he told us another story about a being in the forest that was part man and part tree. When he saw the incredulous look on our faces, he asked us in all seriousness, "Don't you believe me?" When I was growing up in Massachusetts, I personally knew a couple of people who regularly saw little elf-like spirits in the woods around where I lived. A lot of people have experiences with ghosts and spirits. Another friend of ours here in San Antonio, Susie, she saw the ghost of a young girl standing in the doorway of her bedroom. Maybe in the West, it's poo-pooed among some to call these phenomena spirits. It's labeled as something else, or its causes are attributed to something else. There is some discussion about whether the lower realms are actually physical places or not. Some people say they are actually physical places, like the hungry ghost realm and the hell realm. Maybe they are physical places of some sort, but are they real or not real? Well, is this life real or not real? You know, it's real insofar as our particular senses are concerned. So in one way, you could say maybe each realm is as real as the karma that creates it, because what we are perceiving in this life is a creation of our karma. Maybe the environment in another realm is as real as the environment we're experiencing now. Other lamas say that the hell realm, for example, is purely karmically created. It's an illusion. In other words, it's not a real physical place, but it appears that way so vibrantly because of one's karma. When we have some kind of hallucination or when we're dreaming, often we're completely convinced that what we're experiencing is real. So hallucinations and dreams are illusory, but we experience them as real at the time. The point is, they are also due to our mental states, aren't they? They're dependent on the mind. That's why Shanti Deva said there's nothing to fear in the 3 realms apart from the negative mind, because that's the thing that creates our environment and creates our whole perception of it. So now we're going to talk about the relationship between our karmic actions and the type of lower realms that result from those kinds of actions. There's a real long explanation in chapter 10 of Lama Tsongkhapa's great treatise on the stages of the path, with many descriptive pages about the lower realms. Given that Tsongkhapa wrote these descriptions in the 14th century, they have a very medieval flavor to them. But like all phenomena that come into existence in dependence upon causes and conditions, it's only logical that the lower realms would be evolving moment to moment and keeping up with the times. So when you hear some of these descriptions, keep in mind that the way in which these realms are experienced currently may be a little different than how they were experienced in the 14th century. Venerable Thupten Chodron describes them just enough to give us a sense of how the experiences of these realms relate to the destructive actions that are the cause for them. So here they are. And this isn't all of them, and it's not going to take a long time. The 8 hot hells. All right, so there are 8 hot hells, what they call 8 hot hells. The first is called the reviving hell. And when I read this description in Tsongkhapa, I kind of laughed because it sounds so ridiculous, but when we talk a little more about it, it's actually not. So the beings in this hell assemble and hack each other with various weapons that appear one by one through the force of their karma until they swoon and fall down to the ground. Then a voice from the sky commands, revive, and they rise up again and hack each other as before and experience measureless suffering. All right, so kind of get yourself out of the medieval view and update it to today and think about what kind of beings could be born in that kind of hell. Soldiers who kill one another in battle? It sounds a lot like experiencing a war battle over and over again. Being a soldier in this day and age who experiences the horrific kind of bloodlust that can occur in battle can create the karma to be born in a kind of life where that just keeps getting played out over and over and over again because it is just so traumatic. I read descriptions and heard stories about the kinds of unbelievable things that soldiers did in Afghanistan and Iraq during the wars there. I mean, it blew my mind. They were so unlike anything a normal person would do. They were very, very much like what's being described here in this hell realm. So we need to think in terms of that, in terms of the kind of experience a person could have that would result in a lifetime. And you know, you have to remember these lives are not permanent phenomena like everything else. When the karma burns up, you know, that life is over. When the karma burns up for our human life is over. They are not permanent. They're not eternal. Okay. So here's the second one, the black line hell. Here, black lines are used to mark the bodies of the living beings born there into quarters, eighths, and many other smaller divisions. Then the beings experience being split and chopped along these lines with weapons. So what kind of beings could be born there? Well, if you think about a butcher, you know, if you think about people who hack apart others' bodies or torture others in a similar kind of way, you know, there are people out there that do this. Well, then it kind of makes sense that when they die, that's such a powerful action. They'd be born into something like that where they are experiencing the results of what they did. The third is called crushing hell. In the crushing hell, beings are chased into very narrow valleys and then they're crushed. They're crushed by things falling on them. This could be the kind of hell for beings who have a very strong habit of hunting and killing animals or other kinds of living beings and enjoying it. You can see the relationship between the action and the karmic appearance somebody has as a result of that action. The fourth is called howling hell. Here, you're chased into a house made of burning iron, and then that house starts to close in on you, and you get squished in the middle of it. Tipton Children says that this is the result of being severely addicted to intoxicants, alcohol, narcotic drugs, stuff like that. And it's like the mind gets so trapped and squished in that state that it's reborn into this trapped, squished environment. So that's the howling hell. The next one's the great howling hell. This is similar to the howling hell, except that the beings are inside two iron houses, one within the other, and they're squished by two houses. The next one, the sixth one, is the hot hell. Beings are boiled in blazing iron kettles filled with molten copper. Remember, these are medieval, medieval descriptions. So they're boiled alive and they're speared at the same time. Tipton Children says this is a result of throwing animals or other kinds of beings into hot boiling water, like when we boil lobsters alive. We may think this is perfectly great, but what does the lobster think? What does that feel like to be boiled alive? So then the next one is called that was the hot hell. Then there's the extremely hot hell. This is like the hot hell, but it has more fire, more spears, more torture. Then the eighth is the unrelenting hell. People or beings, I should say, are burned alive and tortured in different ways over and over. Again, this is the result of having tortured and killed others regularly. There are living beings currently today on this planet, including humans, that do this kind of thing. It exists. As much as we don't like to think about it, it exists. So then we move on, and we won't go into a lot of detail on these. We could move on to what are called the 8 cold hells. They say the cause for this in the cold hells is this frozen attitude of closed-mindedness, stubbornly clinging on to wrong views, like when our mind gets stuck in a cynical attitude or a really skeptical attitude. Our minds are just stuck and frozen in our own wrong views, so it creates the karma to be born in an environment like that. Then there are what are called the 4 neighboring hells. After your karma for the hot hells and the cold hells is used up, there are 4 surrounding or neighboring hells that you have to go through to get out. Again, remember, this is coming from the medieval point of view, okay? So in one of these neighboring hells, there's a tree, and the leaves of this tree are made out of knives. You hear somebody up at the top who you're really attached to, and they're calling out to you from the top of the tree. They're calling their name, come to me, come to me. And so you're desperately trying to climb up this tree, and the leaves that are made of knives are facing down, and they plunge into you as you're going up. And thorns on the bark, they stick into your legs and stuff. So when you finally get up there, of course it's a complete hallucination. And then you hear the voice of your beloved one down at the bottom of the tree. So come down, I'm here, I'm here. So again, you chase after the object of your attachment. You start going down, and all the knife leaves turn upwards and the blades face up, and you get impaled as you go down. This is attachment. Wherever you try and go, when your mind is stuck in attachment, you get cut. An external karmic reflection of what's going on internally. So now we move on to the hungry ghost realm. Those were the hell realms. The hungry ghost realm. In the hungry ghost realm, there are a wide variety of hungry ghosts, and some of them are helpful spirits, some of them are harmful spirits, and some of them are beings who are completely tortured by severe hunger and thirst their whole lives. So with the hot hells and the cold hells and the hell realms, the extreme anger is one of the chief motivating things, anger and violence, chief motivating things to cause one to be born in a hell realm, because the hell realm is so violent. In the hungry ghost realm, which is characterized by clinging and the consequent frustration to not getting what you want, it's attachment that's the main cause of being born in that kind of a realm. Again, the mind just gets stuck. Here it's so stuck that, for example, one of these kinds of beings that they talk about has this huge, enormous stomach, a very long, thin neck that's sort of tied in knots. And that being is continually hungry and thirsty. This kind of rebirth shows us how karma can obscure our mind and we can't see what's in front of us, what's in front of our own nose. Even if a hungry ghost, for instance, stands in front of this beautiful clear lake, they don't see the water. Even if they have a vision of water in the distance and they run for it, it's like a mirage. You know, they want so desperately to drink. As soon as they get there, what it appears to be, what they say, is pus and blood. This is because the karmic obscuration is so strong that the mind can't see clearly. We can see that too in our own lives. We've probably all had some experiences in our past, which we perceived the situation in one way, and then only years later did we look back and say, wow, I put myself into so much misery because I looked at the situation like that. We can think of times in our life when our frame of reference, our karmic obscuration, you might say, was so strong that we created our own suffering. We can't even see what's there, like when somebody's trying to be kind to us, and all we see is somebody interfering in our lives. This is what the hungry ghost realm is like. There are many different kinds of ghosts in this realm, not just the ones that have the huge stomachs and long thin necks. We can see how this realm is just what it's like when we're stuck in attachment, when our minds are fixated with attachment. We don't actually see what's there. We project onto this attached object something that actually doesn't exist. We always feel frustrated because we can't get what we want. And whatever we get, it isn't enough. It's like we just get one drop of water. We want more. Or somehow we do get what we want, and then we twist it and turn it around, and it makes us miserable all over again. So being stuck in attachment is the chief cause for being born in the hungry ghost realm. And of course, refusing food to people or beings, being stingy, hoarding food, other similar actions can cause that kind of rebirth. Miserliness is another one of the chief causes for this. For example, miserliness with material things, or miserliness with the Dharma or our learning. In other words, if somebody wants to learn something from us and we don't want to share what we've learned, or we don't want to share the Dharma with somebody who's interested, we're miserly about it. We're threatened by somebody else knowing as much as we do. This can happen in non-Dharma situations a lot, in businesses or different kinds of situations where people have a certain kind of expertise and experience, and they don't really want to share it because they want to be the one who knows it all, who gets ahead, who's on top, you know? It's that kind of miserly thing. Now we move on to the animal realm. The general sufferings of animals are the suffering of heat and cold, getting eaten by each other, getting tortured, and getting hunted by human beings and other animals. Animals experience all sorts of suffering. I mean, just think of some of the way laboratory animals are treated, or farm animals, the chickens and the cows, how they're treated sometimes. We certainly wouldn't want to give up our body to feed somebody else, and the animals do that, and they don't have a choice about it. So it really can be quite an unfortunate rebirth. They have very little control over their own destiny. The general cause for an animal rebirth is this foggy mind we talked about, this closed-minded bewilderment. Specifically, Venerable Chudran talks about a particular aspect, which is lacking respect for people and things that are virtuous and good. In other words, out of our ignorance, you know, we mistreat or we ignore the virtues of other things and people. We can see how this kind of mind's really very ignorant when virtue and goodness causes some kind of aversion in us, you know? Another possible cause for an animal rebirth is this kind of blind indulgence in animal-like behavior. You can see that some human beings act worse than animals. If we have a hard time imagining human beings being born as animals, just look at how some human beings act, although they have a human body. Some of them really act worse than animals, so it doesn't seem like that big of a jump to get a body that matches their mental state. So here are some reflections on the lower realms. One of the ways that by reflecting on the lower realms, what we can do is we can help us to break our bad habits. It's helpful to spend some time thinking about this. It might not be pleasant, but it's very sobering, and it can stimulate our practice of the Dharma to get us to think again about where we're going in our life and what the purpose or function of our life is. It can be a very strong motivator to break some of our bad habits. It also helps us to generate compassion. By thinking about these lower realms, it can also help us to generate compassion for all the other living beings who are experiencing these lower realms, or who are currently creating the causes to experience them. Sometimes we see people doing awful, harmful things, and we get angry at them. We get angry at world leaders, for instance, for making decisions that result in the killing of so many people. If we understand karma clearly, and if we look at some of these people and the karma they're creating and the suffering that they'll experience as a result of that, then even though we can't condone what they're doing or what they've done, we can get a sense of compassion for those who are so confused that they create suffering for themselves and others, thinking that somehow they're doing the right thing. If we understand these kinds of things, it helps us to prevent getting angry at people who act negatively, because we understand how they're creating their own suffering. By having some compassionate kind of feeling for them, we'll care for them and maybe even intervene a little bit to try and help them stop. The other benefit about thinking of this is that it energizes us to practice. By thinking about the lower realms, it gives us some energy to really use our human mind while we have it for something constructive besides watching TV and surfing the internet. For example, when we encounter animals, instead of thinking, oh, how sweet or how cute or how beautiful and interesting they are, if we try to put ourselves in the animal's place, we can really start to think about what would it be like to have that animal's rebirth. What would it, I mean, this morning I was turning the water off the hose and a little toad jumped away, and I looked at the toad and thought, man, what would it be like if I was that toad, you know? To really start putting yourself in the place of other beings. It helps us to generate compassion for that being, and it helps us appreciate our present potential and possibility so that we won't want to waste it. So from thinking about the sufferings of the lower realms, we do get an uncomfortable feeling. And often that feeling comes when we start to look at the karma we've created throughout our life, when we start to think of what the possible consequences of that could be. We get a very uncomfortable feeling and we want to do something about it. We want a method to follow so that we can purify, so that we can stop creating that kind of karma. We want some guidance and we want some practice. And that's why the meditation on refuge comes next. Because when we begin to see that we aren't in a nice, stable, secure position, we could die at any time, and we do have negative imprints on our mind stream, then we start to seek refuge and we begin to search out those who can guide us, so we can start thinking about why the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are a reliable refuge and how they can guide us and how we can follow. So thinking about the sufferings of the lower realms shouldn't make us just sit there with this horrible feeling in the pit of our stomach. Instead, we should use that feeling to take refuge with a mind of strong confidence in the ability of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha to guide us. That will make our practice really strong at that point. And it cuts away a lot of our pride. Pride's a big hindrance on the path. I mean, recently, a guy from prison contacted me, and apparently saw this has happened before. Somehow he heard about the website, or somebody told him about the Tibetan Buddhism Center for World Peace. He's in Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, and what he wrote about was that he was in the Arabian Gulf just recently, and he was on a Navy ship, and that his job was to harm as much of the human populace as possible. And after a certain point, he couldn't do it anymore. He knew that it wasn't right. And he didn't tell me exactly what happened, but my impression is that he deserted. And that's why he's in prison right now. And so he's really very, very interested in learning about the Dharma. I've sent him some of these transcripts. And he's when I thought about this hell realm where the wars happening, the fighting, the killing, and the state of mind that one could have if you knew, wow, I've done something that's really, really terrible, and I'm sorry that I did it. I didn't want to do that. I mean, I think it's incredible that this guy actually made the decision to stop and do whatever he did. So he's in prison for a while, like, I don't know, a decade or so, or something like that. He does have somebody on the outside who he knows who is a Buddhist practitioner, and perhaps that's how he heard about the Tibetan Buddhism Center for World Peace. So it's interesting. What's really interesting to me about this is that he asked specifically about refuge. He wants to know how he can take refuge. So he's already going from the position he's in to going, I need something to guide me. I need some help. So there was another guy from prison several years ago who contacted us, and I wrote him back and got Lama Pasang to sort of put into writing a short self-refuge ceremony that you can do. So I'm going to send it to this guy, and I just really find it
When you're done, I mean,
very
commercial for a book.
Okay. Anyway, that's the next subject that we're going to be doing is taking refuge. It's kind of a detailed subject, and it will take several sessions, but it's worth going through. All right, so go ahead, Kavita. What was your? You want me to shut mine off and turn your?
Yeah.
Okay.
Venerable Robina, who we all have met at this point, I think, edited this, and she's been doing some classes. And I've recently read it. And I'll just say, the first section is something that you read, and then the back half or more, maybe 2/3, are all the practices recommended. One of the points that Lama Zopa emphasizes quite a bit is that, and it relates to this business of the hell realms, that the situation in the place where you are as you die, as your body's leaving, definitely plays an extremely key role in what your rebirth will be, because ultimately you are experiencing, in your next rebirth, you're experiencing your existence through your consciousness. And so the state of your consciousness, as it detaches from the physical, becomes completely liberated from limitations, almost like quite a bit like in your dreams, where if you go to sleep having watched a scary movie, you will have nightmares. So anyway, the point being is, I mean, I'm trying to bone up on this issue of death and dying a little bit. I mean, we did an okay job with Patricia, but not as good a job as we could have done. And as we are all aging and our Sangha is aging, I imagine we'll be faced with the opportunity to help each other leave our physical container as auspiciously as possible. Anyway, I just want to mention that as Christopher was talking about this and so forth with what determines the realm, we would be wise to habituate ourselves. And one of the practices he recommends, and I'm reading something else that recommends this, is that as you're falling to sleep, which is in many ways with the channels, drops and winds, your subtle body, many ways is the exact process. So the recommendation is, as you're going to sleep, kind of rehearse it as you would the time of death. And I think We haven't done as a group the study of the dissolution of the elements and the withdrawals and the various signs and so forth. And I don't think Christopher and I are really qualified to do that, but when Geshe Nima comes, I will request that he teach on a small text called Death, Bardo, and Rebirth. It's sort of like a little manual because basically the more it's sort of like if you've ever been on a scary ride, I'm trying to think of one like at Disneyland, there's the
Snow White's Scary Adventure.
well, the more familiar you get with something, the less frightening it is. And ultimately, it's not meant to be frightening. But um, the other book I'm reading is something related to Kala Chakra, and they back each other up quite strongly on this importance of the setting and the atmosphere in the room as the person is passing away. If you're a practitioner, to have images of your teachers and the things that give you inspiration and so forth. But it goes on, interestingly, they discourage having animals in the room. In particular, he mentions cats, and I forget why, but hi, Tashi. I forget why, but anyway, this business about preparing for death is on my mind. Here's our cat that had the surgery. Here's his shaved side. Several $1,000s later. He's like now an old geriatric cat, no teeth. But his cage had the medicine Buddha Tonga up in it for 2 weeks with medicine Buddha or other Dharma playing. I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Anyway, I wanted to share that business because, for a practitioner, death is what they've been waiting for in their whole life of let me be specific, a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner in the Mahayana lineage, and especially in our lineage, I can say that with confidence that it is 100% the case in our lineage that the practitioners, as they deepen their understanding of the nature of reality and how consciousness interplays with the apparent material world, that the time of death is what they are practicing for, because specifically when you're dissolving, when your physical elements are dissolving, if you reach a state called the fundamental mind of clear light. We've touched on that with the Mahamudra class, but and in that clear light, as Christopher was mentioning, the idea is this mother clear light, which is a term they use to, it is sort of the basic pervasive state of consciousness. The sun clear light is basically the familiarity that you build through your meditation practice on the dissolution of the elements. And specifically, as you rehearse this, it's pretend, you imagine and you read their descriptions, which is why it's so important. This awareness, this sun clear light and the mother clear light, as Christopher mentioned, meet. Well, that moment at the time of death is what a Buddhist Mahayana Gelugpa practitioner is studying and practicing for. Because at that moment, when you reach that when all the elements have dissolved and all the winds have withdrawn from the channels into the indestructible drop at your heart, the central channel opens and you can experience the mind of clear light. A practitioner wants that because in that state of consciousness is when we as practitioners can most accurately, profoundly, and fully experience the fact of the emptiness of inherent existence. So it's said to be the most potent aspect of your practice, and that you will for sure, if you can succeed in recognizing the mind of clear light when it arises at the end, then you can meditate as you've been practicing your whole life. Then you can meditate on emptiness and bodhicitta and actually achieve the next state of existence. So it's kind of and in this, Carolyn would have been thoroughly familiar with this, as would, of course, Geshe Drogpa was thoroughly familiar with this, so that at the time of death, there would be some kind of anticipation and excitement. And my sense is, in some of my reading now that relates to the time of death, the further you are along in your practice, the more kind of excited you become and anticipated in a positive way. It's almost like you're taking a test again that you've taken before, and maybe this time I will really successfully complete this awareness. We're so fortunate as a group because we've had contact with people who've actually achieved this to varying degrees, and I want to share this. It's kind of personal, and yet it is sometimes the more personal, the more universal. Geshe Drogpa, when his last visit, I knew intuitively he kept saying, "I'm sick," though we couldn't see any physical evidence of it. It was kind of weird. And he didn't teach that last visit. He visited. It was like he was on his tour of North America to say goodbye. Though to look at him and to interact with him, we traveled with him, ate with him, housed him. We didn't see any. Anyway, during that visit, I asked him, "Geshe Drogpa, how will I find you in my next life?" Now, I posed this question to a practitioner who has been, as Christopher mentioned, he had been on a 9-year Kala Chakra retreat. And if you've studied any of these things, even informally, the death process is like the core, the heart of the process, because it's that experience of the clear light mind is where it all was, where the money is. Because essentially, everything we're doing all the time, everything we see, think, and do, but especially the appearing universe, is on the basis of our clear light and is conceptual and is, like we used to say in the 60s, you create your own reality, but it's much more profound than we realized in the 60s. It's not, and it's all karma. So it's not like I can just decide something and it poof, it's magically happens. Anyway, Geshe Drogpa said to me, his response to me took me aback, honestly. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, "I'm not coming back." And he knew at that point full well, and I didn't appreciate fully, talk about missed opportunities, but now reading more about the practice he was doing and so forth, he had already experienced sufficiently this process and knew that he was in a, and I think he, as my very close guru, he knew that someday I would get what he meant, that he had achieved the ability to not involuntarily, like us, involuntarily take a rebirth. So our goal is, of course, to have a positive, to have a chance to keep perfecting our practice as aspiring Buddhas. And so we've been very fortunate. And, this topic, as weird as it is, you could say essentially we are born in a hell. We are born in a hell called the desire realm, where our craving and grasping and all the positive, wonderful things we think we like so much motivate us. Anyway, I just wanted to share all that, but especially, I don't know exactly how we as a group approach this, because some of it is so profound. I feel like it would be better taught by a monk, but we ought to take a stab at it. And maybe we can get sooner or later, get Geshe Nima to teach that death process on the internet, if nothing else, or get Geshe Yeshi to come down from Dallas or something. because, you know, we're all getting closer and closer every day. Thanks for your patience in listening to my comments.
Yeah, thank you. You know, that's good. The there are sections of the Lamrim that touch on these aspects of death, the Bardo, and you know, when we get to those, whenever that is, you know, we can, you know, I can do my best to get as much of that information in there because it's only going to be helpful. It's only going to be helpful. So let us look at the closing prayers.
You think Lama the song would feel comfortable teaching it.
I don't know.
Yeshi would. Yeshi Nima would. Well, anyway.
Share screen.
Robina has, so I suppose I'll check and see if I can find Robina's. I've been listening to her teachings on YouTube on death and reading two different books that relate to death.
I don't know why I'm having trouble getting the prayers. What? Okay. Well, we won't share those right now. I'll just say the prayers and we can call it a session. Yeah, and I'll just say these prayers in English. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that we may liberate all sentient beings from suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. May the view of emptiness, not yet born, arise and grow. And may that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In all my rebirths, may I never be separated from perfect spiritual masters and enjoy the magnificent Dharma. Completing all qualities of the stages and paths, may I quickly achieve the state of Vajradhara. May anyone who merely hears or sees, remembers, touches, or talks to me be instantly freed from all sufferings and abide in happiness forever. It is only from the kindness of my Guru that I have met the peerless teachings of the Buddha. Thus I dedicate all merit so that all sentient beings in the future may be guided by kind and holy gurus. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Christopher.
Oh, you're so welcome. Really, thank you to next week we'll talk about taking refuge. Yeah. Okay.
Very grateful.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Take
Have
care.
a wonderful day, everyone.
Yeah. Same to you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.